World Rally Championship, one of the fastest, most dramatic and most exciting motorsports in the world. If you strip back the years, you'll see that what is there now has been built on many years of evolution. This is WRC history in early years. And it's all very easy to forget that once, just over a century ago, a rally car looked like this. Coming up, would you believe that it was the Mini that started a rallying revolution?
I think, people don't really realise just how good the Mini was across the board.
Jon Voldegaard tells us some of his favourite stories from the past.
When they kissed each other and cried, I understood I had done something very, very big.
And Group B, the ultimate in rally car design, or motorsport gone mad.
It was like being hit by a 20-ton truck from behind when you left the line.
When man invented the motor car in the late 19th century, it was clear that although its main purpose was transportation, human nature wouldn't be able to ignore the competition factor for too long. From 1894, city-to-city road races took place all across the European continent as man satisfied his quest to go faster and further, and motorsport was born.
Well, I think in the early days you couldn't really differentiate between racing and rallying because the early races went from one town to another and the cars started at minute intervals, and the roads were gravel, of course, so it wasn't too different from what we know as rallying today.
Alongside these European road trials, by the early 1900s, immense endurance events were taking place all over the world, including the epic Paris to Peking, first run in 1907 and covering almost 16,000 kilometres.
Then touring became a big thing, and somebody had the great idea that Monte Carlo in January was a lot more pleasant than John O'Groats or Stockholm or wherever they started, so people got into the cars and literally hundreds of people competed in those early Monte Carlo rallies and went down to the Riviera. But of course the roads were nothing like today and the cars were nothing like today. And then if it was a good year and there wasn't too much snow, maybe 150 people would arrive in Monte Carlo with no penalties, so they would have 100 metres along the seafront with a braking test, and the best guy in that would win. And in fact the very first RAC rally in 1934, when it ended up in Torquay, I think, the competition then was 100 yards along the seafront, and it was who could do it slowest without actually stopping. And some Colonel Loughborough, I believe, in a Lanchester, was able to go slower than anybody else, so has the honour of being the first RAC rally winner.
It was the Second World War that saw the increase in the development of a proper road network. Once the continent had begun its recovery and rebuilding, motorsport found a new use for these roads and new speed.
The economies of Europe had grown a bit after the post-war doom and gloom, and there was a bit more disposable income around, and it was kind of a group of friends would get together and essentially organise a rally, or almost a sort of point-to-point event. But certainly there was a lot more navigation. There was not the style of rallying that we know, with flat-out stages and that sort of thing. Before the event started, there was what they called the concentration run, which is where they would start from various cities around Europe. And all arrive in Monte Carlo on a certain day, and then they would start and go out into the Alps from there, and you would have, that section would be timed at say 40 miles an hour, so you'd have a very precise amount of time to make it from A to B.
It was the Scandinavians that first adopted the method of closing the roads to allow competitors to race against the clock.
Some countries developed quicker than others. Let's say I think Finland, Sweden were having speed events, while we in Britain were still wearing our cloth caps and blazers, and speed started coming in the 50s and caught on a bit more, so that probably by early to mid 60s really every rally worth its salt was based on speed.
Then cars had been, well, just cars as they were when they rolled off the production line.
The cars, certainly in the 50s, the cars were proper. They were just road cars. There was no modifications. There was nothing like a roll cage or special seats or anything like that. These cars were just driven from the office. 9 to 5, and then on the weekend they would use them on a rally, and that was it.
In the 50s, they probably went into the factory workshop, where they polished the cylinder heads a bit and put slightly harder brake pads in.
Manufacturers would pick and choose events that they thought would gain them the most publicity. Likewise, they entered whatever car they could.
The British Motor Corporation, which of course was enormous in those days, Austin, Morris, MG, Austin, Healey, Wolseley, Riley, and they would go to something like the Monte Carlo and they would enter one from every make that they possessed. So they would be trying to get 7 or 8 different class wins. So it really was totally different from what we see here today.
It was purely a hobby to them, and they would just get together at the weekend and essentially throw this rally up, and away they'd go.
And co-drivers, well, they really were co-drivers.
When it was literally co-driving, because you were maybe doing 3-4 days at a time. One of the great events of the 50s and 60s was the Liège-Sofia down in Bulgaria. And you left Liège in the north of Belgium and went through all these gravel roads down to Sofia, which took 2.5 days, I think. And there was a 1-hour rest halt in Sofia, and then you turned around and went all the way back. So both guys in the car were clearly driving a lot, the other one was sleeping.
So by the end of the 50s, it was clear that rallying was evolving. Manufacturers were taking an interest and stages were developing, but it was still a long, long way from how we know rallying today. After the break, we see how the Mini changed the face of rallying forever. And we'll see what 600 brake horsepower in a lightweight body shell can do. Welcome back to WRC History, the early years. The most major change in the sport in these early years came in the 60s. It became more professional. At the beginning of the decade, the thought of building a car specifically to participate in a rally couldn't have been further from anyone's mind. But as the 60s began to swing, so did rallying.
The speed came into the sport actually in the 60s was then already Scandinavian drivers like Rauno Alton and Timo Mäkinen and these kind of people, Erik Karlsson. There were two big teams in the 60s, which was Saab from Sweden, and then basically BMC was a Mini. And they also started preparing a nice team and preparing the cars better and also starting professional driving.
To some, it was BMC and the Mini that marked the beginning of rallying as a professional sport.
The Mini was a very special car because it just suited rallying so well, and I think people don't really realise just how good the Mini was across the board. It won Acropolis, it won Thousand Lakes, it won Monte Carlo. It won a complete variety of events.
The Mini was a little bit of an underdog because it was not the actual car that should have won all the events, or most of the events, but it was the first professional team that really stretched things to the limit and did a nice preparation and planning like the first professional team around, and therefore it could collect all the successes by avoiding mistakes the others did.
It was quick for its day, probably no quicker than a small Fiesta today, but it was very quick for its time. It was light, it was manoeuvrable, professional team, good drivers, so it punched above its weight.
Stuart Turner was the man behind Mini's success. He was also the first to recognise the untapped talents of Scandinavian drivers.
Stuart Turner was the team manager there, and he had lots of clever ideas like going in recce and then going in longer recces and then having gravel notes and ice notes, lots of things that have been banned today in fact. And yes, there was more professionalism, and he realised these Finns and Swedes had been driving in snow and ice and gravel since the 50s, and signed up lots of people that nobody had ever heard of, like Timo Mäkinen and Rauno Altonen, and started to win RAC rallies and Monte Carlo rallies.
Scandinavia not only produced some of the best drivers of the era, but also the Saab, Mini's biggest rival.
There weren't too many other manufacturers around. Saab were doing a similar job with their 96. And the 96 was a particularly good car as well, but it wasn't designed as a rally car. It became a good rally car from things like the fact that the engine was placed right over the front, the axle and stuff, and so the traction was very good.
And Erik Karlsson, who is a very big Swede in this tiny little 840cc Saab, drove like these guys like Jari-Matti Latvala and Mikko Hervonen are driving today, but driving this two-stroke, three-cylinder 850 Saab.
The car was quite narrow, quite high, so it had an awful high gravity, so it rolled quite easily. And these guys just needed to keep the foot down and more or less not lift and catch the speed and take the speed they have. Once you know that thing is rolling, you have to keep it rolling because you have no power to accelerate. And then just little braking as you can and take the momentum with you. It was very different driving in today.
Mini and Saab may have been the big rivals of the 60s, but other manufacturers were beginning to get in on the act. Ford had the Lotus Cortina.
Lotus Cortinas were used a lot, especially when the going was on tarmac, or the Coupe des Alpes, the Rally Geneva, or the Tulip Rally from Holland down to Geneva and up. On all those, I mean, the Lotus Cortina did really well.
The big thing about the Lotus Cortina was that there was this guy called Vic Elford who had a wonderful career. I mean, Vic raced in Formula One, won World Sports Car races, started as a co-driver because he couldn't afford to be a driver. And then he ended up driving a Cortina GT and then a Lotus Cortina. He used to come to Ireland, where I lived, every Easter to do the Circuit of Ireland. And this red Cortina that wouldn't turn anybody's head today, we waited for months to see this thing on Good Friday at scrutineering in the Circuit of Ireland. So that car had a big place in my heart.
And Porsche brought along a racing car, the magnificent 911.
Well, the Porsche then became a car that started to do so well in the hands of Vic Elford, Björn Waldegard, and so the rougher the going went, there was different from many of the others that were so tarmac built. The Porsche was very strong.
Because I had born up in a Volkswagen, when Porsche came into the business 1967 for me, it was just a bigger Volkswagen because it had the engine in the back, if you follow what I mean. It was the best car at that time.
Whenever Porsche went as a factory team, they often dominated. And really their heart at the time was in sports car racing, and you feel if they'd put the effort into rallying that someone like Ford had done, that they would have dominated for much longer than they did.
With special stages now becoming the norm, the rallies themselves started to take shape.
The same element exists still from those days to these days. You start from A and you finish at B, and the guy who's done the best time, he is quickest at that point on that stage. I remember in the late 60s when we did like 24 hours non-stop was nothing. The road sections were as tough as the special stages. We used to have notes in those days on the most difficult events. We had notes all the way from the start to the finish, all the stages and all the road sections as well.
Talking about notes, co-drivers were no longer just driver stand-ins.
The role of the co-driver changed slightly from being the man who would essentially plot the route from A to B and work out the time, how long they got to get from A to B, and exactly when they got to arrive at a certain place. Then we started to have recce's, and the co-driver started to make pace notes in, I think it was late 50s, early 60s.
Early pace notes were fairly primitive, and people got them better and better, and co-drivers became professional. Probably the first ones, people like John Davenport, Henry Lydon. Funnily enough, while the Finns and Swedes were becoming the dominant force in driving, the British were becoming the dominant force in co-driving.
Here to give you an experience of what rally in the 60s was like is Timo Mäkinen in the car of the decade, the Mini, on the special stages of Finland 1968.
Changing second gear. Changing third gear. And now it's coming long right-hand corner. Put it car a little bit sideways. Keep it out. And put it second gear. Out any clutch. I'm using left foot braking. Putting first gear, medium left. Sideways. And full power, second gear. And third gear. Brow. Jump. Jump. Very fast left. And plenty sideways. And away. Good. And sideways again. All time using left foot braking and keep the car balance with brake. Short corner. If you have short corner, don't put the car never sideways.
Rallying was now a professional sport. Drivers were being paid, co-drivers were reading pace notes, and manufacturers were flooding to high-speed special stages across Europe. So if the 60s was when rallying really became a sport, it wasn't until the 70s that its participants became sportsmen. It was the decade for change and the time where the sport of rallying gained structure, discipline and revenue for manufacturers. But even then, rallies were a very different affair.
The 1970s, well, firstly, the rallies were a lot longer. The whole exercise was making sure you had the right tyres, the right fuel in the right places, squads of people. You know, it took 120 people to some of these rallies as well. So it really was a big military exercise, and it more about pacing yourself as well, because driving through the night, perhaps 3-day events, it was fairly long endurance rally.
It was Alpine Renault who dominated the start of the decade with their Berlinette, winning in 1971 with the late, great Ove Anderson.
Wonderful character, a true sort of sportsman, and sort of typical Scandinavian, Swedish, slightly reticent, never sort of the first person to speak, but always with a positive contribution to make.
In 1973, the FIA created the official World Championship for manufacturers, and it was Jean-Luc Tellier who helped the Berlinette become the championship's first winners.
He was maybe the most talented driver of all time, because he didn't have much of a work ethic, didn't enjoy doing recce's, and if there was no recce in an event, he would almost invariably finish on the podium because he was on even footing with everybody else. Liked to stop at service and have a bottle of wine at lunchtime, and a very relaxed guy, but just an amazing driver.
But the Berlinette's dominance soon faltered, and the big battle at the dawn of the new championship was an all-Italian one. Lancia's Stratos beating first Fiat's 124, and then the improved 131 Abarth Spider in 74 and 75.
That was probably the most astonishing rally car ever. This wedge-shaped beast with a Ferrari engine that made a noise like a Formula One car, the most exciting thing spectators have ever seen.
The Lancia, you had to drive very, very aggressively to get any speed out from it. But when you were brave enough, it was fast like hell.
It was a beast to drive. The appearance of the whole car, the shape, the sound. I mean, you were standing on a mountain, and 6 kilometers away, the start of the stage, you could hear it.
Lancia had unleashed a beast that had proven itself to be a force to be reckoned with. But the rivalry with Fiat took a new twist when they bought Lancia. Outside of rally, the commercial success of the Fiat was to be the Stratos' downfall.
Well, they dropped the Stratos because it was not the commercial car to sell. I mean, they should have built 400 or 500, which they never did anyway, for homologation, and there was no marketing interest in that car at all, so they switched to the Fiat 131, which worked really well for Fiat.
After defeating Lancia, Fiat's new battle commenced with Ford. The 131 beat Ford's Escort Mark II to the title in 77 and 78. Although narrowly missing out, Ford will have been happy with their Safari win in 77.
The value of winning that one event would outweigh 3 others, or even the World Championship itself. You could use that promotion year on year. It's a great endorsement of a car's reliability and overall performance. Safari Rally's always been that iconic event. You know, it went on for days on end. The roads were long and fast, very demanding and hard on the car, equally so on the crew as well, because it was pretty relentless. And of course, you never knew what was going to come on round the next corner. It could be a local truck, or it could be a giraffe, and the river crossings.
You had to plan it in a complete different way, and as more you get involved as a driver in testing and planning for tire chains, where should you take petrol, almost where should you stop for a pee. I mean, you had to plan everything.
And Bjorn should know, he won that Safari Rally in 77 in a Mark II Escort.
It was the 25th anniversary of the Safari Rally. It was the 25th anniversary of Queen Elizabeth to become a queen, and the 25th anniversary of Kenya as a self-independent country. So I think Ford felt the pressure, and the rally was 6,000 kilometers long, and it was the wettest, most horrible, most difficult rally ever, and we won it. So at the end of the day, when you see the boss of Ford and the European PR boss, when they kissed each other and cried, I understood I had done something very, very big.
Rally as we know it was born in 1979, when the FIA finally decided to create a world championship for drivers. Alongside Hannu Mikkola, Bjorn secured a manufacturer's win for Ford, but it was their battle for the first driver's title that kept fans glued to the end. And that battle was fought and won in the Ivory Coast. As Ford weren't competing in that final rally of the season, both drivers contested it in a Mercedes-Benz.
Hannu and I was fighting throughout the year, and Ford, they didn't have the budget to run us in all rallies, so they allow us to drive Mercedes on the African rallies. So the last rally of the year, Ivory Coast Rally, Hannu had to win to be champion, and if I was just second behind him, I should win by one point. When I came to the finish and I was second, and people come to say that, hey, congratulations, you are the world champion. Oh yes, I'm the world champion.
Although Bjorn became world champion largely thanks to the Mark II Escort, he had already made his name in the 70s, managing the powerful Porsche 911s and mastering the Lancia Stratos, as well as notching countless other drives for various manufacturers on his bedpost.
Bjorn was clearly a great driver. Won San Remo when it was purely tarmac. He won Sweden many times in snow, won lots of gravel rallies, of course. Won the Safari Rally, I think, 4 times. So Bjorn could win pretty much anywhere.
I think he set the original standard for professionalism. The man never stopped working at test, and he never, ever, ever looked flustered, even in the most dreadful of scenarios and situations.
But it is the Escort Mark II, that iconic car, which will forever be synonymous with Bjorn's success.
It was so controllable, it was easy to set up and run. The drivers could extract fantastic results and performances from them because of the nature of the car. It wasn't a particularly high-tech car, but it was strong, it was reliable, easy to drive, easy to service, but in those days it was the machine to have.
It was always the spectator's favourite, made a wonderful noise, and it was sideways, and it had the iconic drivers like Ari Vatten and Björn Voldegaard, Hannu Mikkola, Timo Mäkinen. I mean, all the greats drove that car.
The Escort's success continued into the early 80s. In 81, Ari Vatten won the World Championship, co-driven by David Richards.
We went through the season either winning or having a big accident, and it was always like that with Ari. And it was not won until the final round of the championship in the Rally GB. And in fact, the last stage of that rally was very close to my family home in North Wales, and the last corner of the last rally of that year was the first corner I ever stood as a 12-year-old boy watching a rally. So it was a very nostalgic moment for me personally.
So the 70s, it gave us disco, Star Wars and Space Invaders, but it also gave us a manufacturer's championship, a driver's championship, the Berlinette, the Stratos and the Escort Mark II. Frankly, rally wouldn't be WRC now without the wholesale changes that this decade brought. But what happened next would cause rallying to rival F1 and turn cars into jet planes on wheels. Find out all about Group B after the break. Welcome back to WRC history, the early years. In 1982, the face of rallying would be changed forever. A small car manufacturer from Germany would revolutionise the sport. The Audi Quattro was born, and with it, the seeds of the awesome Group B era had been sown. This was the dawn of the supercar. Looking back now, over 2 decades later, these cars were like dragons, mythical, powerful, fire-breathing beasts that only a selected few could control and which at times could turn on their master. What was clear was that following Audi's innovation, the sport would never be the same again.
I remember sitting with Hanno Mikkola, he was in the Ford team with us, and he said, I'm going to go and drive for Audi next year. Well, we'd never heard of Audi, and that puts it in perspective. Audi were, in those days, a sort of a modestly cheap German car, which, and we didn't know much about it.
It made everybody else realise that, to be competitive in the championship, you had to have a four-wheel drive car. And I think, of course, that, it's probably something that could have been stamped out earlier, but the trouble was that obviously Audi had made a big commitment and they were firmly in the World Championship, and of course everybody really wanted another manufacturer there.
We didn't appreciate the impact four-wheel drive would have on the World Rally Championship, the way it would just change it forever. And the Audi Quattro, through that 80s period, it developed into the sort of flame-throwing, fire-eating beast that it was by the end of the 80s. It was quite, to watch that, and it was quite extraordinary. Of course, that saw the demise of all two-wheel drive cars by the end of the 80s.
It was a fantastic time to be going rallying because there were a lot of manufacturers involved building all these newfangled cars with new ideas. It was a bit of an engineer's paradise. The FIA freed up the regulations to allow evolutions on the existing Group B cars, which almost allowed Formula One cars for the forest.
These cars were in a league of their own, some of the most extravagant, extreme and downright excessive cars around. Some say, understandably, that Group B made Formula One look dull.
From a driver's point of view, it was a great era because they were special cars, and some of them were beasts. They were very difficult to drive. If you think now what the technology that you've got with differentials, and the first four-wheel drive cars were fixed, solid four-wheel drive, so they were very, very heavy. You couldn't use the handbrake, so you had to really think and plan your technique to get around particular hairpins on rallies. And
the main change related to the relationship between rally cars and road cars. Rules stipulate that rally cars have to be manufactured for the showroom as well as the stages. In Group B days, manufacturers only needed to produce 200 cars to be sold that were identical to those being rallied. 200 meant the sky was the limit in design, engineering and cost. Not only did the era give birth to four-wheel drive, but also the turbocharger, lightweight body shells and more horsepower in a rally car than ever before.
The regulations allowed you to build a special car. It didn't have to be based on a sort of production type car. So that's of course when the Lancias and the Peugeot started to build out and out. And the same with Ford. A totally unique car built purely for the World Championship Rally.
Everybody decided then that sort of special vehicles were the way to go. Four-wheel drive was clearly coming to the fore. Austin Rover built the Metro 6R4, probably one of the ugliest rally cars there's ever been, but still a great car to this day. And you had a whole range of others. The Lancias expanded from the 037 into their really Group B sort of prototype cars, and they became extremely fast. The turbocharged engines on these would be producing 600 horsepower, which is double where we are today, and which puts life into perspective.
The four-wheel drive made the big revolution, because with the four-wheel drive you had the traction to put the horsepower onto the ground. Before you were having 250, 280 horsepower rear-wheel driven cars, or maybe the Saab even front-wheel driven cars, but there was a limit on the traction, and there was a limit on you would just rub off the tires by spinning, and the tires were gone, but you wouldn't go any faster. So there was a limit of putting the power on the road. And then of course now you had four-wheels driven, and now you could put 500 horsepower driven by four wheels onto the ground. And that was madness on wheels.
Everything was just rushing. I mean, suddenly there were cars with 600 brake horsepower in plastic body. Completely stupid and dangerous. And they realized, unfortunately, a little bit too late. A few stupid accidents happened before they were stopped. It was a fantastic and fascinating era of rally sport, but we could live without that.
More on the tragic legacy of the Group B monsters later, but for now let's appreciate the three machines that came to define an era. As we have already heard, the Audi Quattro started the revolution, and it still remains one of the most iconic cars to have ever rallied.
It was like being hit by a 20-ton truck from behind when you left the line. The car just rocketed away compared with all the other cars. The power kept coming, the brakes, the handling, everything was just so much of a step up from everything else. It changed the shape of rallying. It brought in four-wheel drive, turbocharging, tremendous performance. Everything else was obsolete overnight.
I have to say Audi did a good choice with this car, because when I started in France, 7% of people didn't know what was Audi. And from that time, I think from 81, I think everybody knows what is Audi now.
An Audi Quattro going through a forest where it makes this great noise, especially in the overrun where things were chittering and banging and popping, and it was to stand in the middle of a forest at 3 o'clock in the morning, as we used to do, and hear one of those things coming from about 10 k's away was just astonishing.
They were a car that people dream about, and especially this one has a special noise, special look, and really it was a car that people were dreaming to drive, so they were very excited to come and to see us.
The legacy the Audi Quattro left was all too apparent. Four-wheel drive cars took over the sport, and it was never the same again. But it wasn't the only wonder to come from this period of imaginative and technical development. The Peugeot 205 T16 debuted in Corsica in 1984 and took only 3 events to become a winner. From then on, the little Peugeot became the yardstick for all manufacturers.
That pushed Group B right to the limits, and just the looks and the styling of the car was tremendous, and to watch people like Ari and Kankkunen drive the car.
It was a special car because at this time it was the only one car who was thought very cleverly, with a central engine, four-wheel drive, a turbocharged engine, and it was really the first rally car made for rally at this period. I was test driver during the development, that means in 83, also in 84, and in 84 I drove for the first 3 rallies.
You always find with manufacturers they push the technology to the next limit, and you can, if you get in a situation where you put a good bunch of designers together and a forward-thinking team who are willing to explore new age technology and development and all areas of car performance, aero and everything, that's what comes out the other end, and that's clearly how the Peugeot operation was working there.
The 205 T16 secured 16 World Championship victories and 2 drivers and manufacturers titles in 1985 and 1986. And Peugeot's interest in the car wasn't merely for sport.
Peugeot 205, not only as a fantastic car and a revolutionary concept, but also Peugeot 205, played an important role in rescuing Peugeot from that they were on the brink of the collapse at that time, and without 205, it would have gone belly up.
So we've had the power from Germany and the agility from France. Where next but the home of some of the most beautiful cars in the world, Italy.
I am very lucky, I have a really fantastic team and cars. In all Lancia, like in Stratos, S4, Cero 37, after in Lancia Delta. Also Lancia is, you know, in rallying is like in Ferrari in Formula 1, you know, and people like very much in Italian team.
The start of the Group B era saw the Lancia 037, a flyweight racer that looked like it could take off at any moment. But it was two-wheel drive. Lancia had to come up with something better. What they created was the Delta S4, possibly the scariest car ever built. Unofficial figures claim the S4 could accelerate from 0 to 100 kilometers an hour on gravel in just 2.5 seconds.
S4 was a particular car, you know, was a car not easy to drive. I have in my eyes still the image of the driver coming out of the car after some special stages. I don't want to say terrorized, but not really relaxed, you know.
The Delta was, I have to say, one of my favourites. Just the raw speed and performance of the Delta. I remember standing in, I think it was Cody Brennan or somewhere on the RAC in '85 and watching, and you couldn't believe what you'd just seen, you know, coming out of a hairpin, and it was accelerating to 100 miles an hour in Formula 1 speeds on gravel.
The S4 wasn't an easy car to tame, and few drivers enjoyed its ride. And with the premature ending to Group B, this monumental car only won 4 rallies. So, with some of the most spectacular cars on the planet, it required a certain type of driver to fight for glory. These men were skillful, brave, and many would say ever so slightly crazy. Harry Vatanen won the championship in 1981, the year before Group B hit the scenes, but he was instrumental in Peugeot's 2 manufacturer championships in '85 and '86.
Very, very quick, arrived on the scene, showed his potential early on, was soon snapped up by the Ford team. And had a lot of success with them. And it's only when he moved to Peugeot that he looked like taking another title. But unfortunately he had a bad accident, and that set him back and effectively kept him away from winning further titles.
I was kind of an artist. I listened always, and I still do, listen more to my heart than my brain, and that is my way to approach it. And when you do it like that, yes, you miss out quite a few victories, but you never have a boring life.
Despite winning the 1982 championship with Opel, Walter Röhrl will always be linked with his time at Audi. The German notched up 14 wins in his 14-year WRC career.
Walter Röhrl was more straight in like a racing driver and brake and turn, more understeering than oversteering. And it proved to be very fast, but I practiced that sometime, and to me it felt dangerous, but not for him.
He's a little bit of a difficult character. You know, he wants to be the best. He's driven by commitment. He needs to win, and he needs to prove himself that I'm the best, I'm the best, I'm the best. And he's never relaxing. He's never easing off. And he was picking the events he liked and tried to be the best there, and he could drive stage times that nobody else could match, that you can say. But it was only the events that he liked that he could do these things.
The most successful driver to have never won the championship is Markku Alén. The Finn took 19 wins, but never the title. He was also the man to coin the phrase maximum attack.
A fantastic driver who never became the world champion, but he should have become champion also. But I don't know why it never happened. Maybe bad luck, or maybe at the wrong place at the wrong time.
He won 19 rallies. He was an extraordinary talent. I think it's fair to say he couldn't really deal with pressure terribly well, and he sort of went into himself, and he could be quite truculent and difficult to deal with when the pressure was on. But as soon as he got in the car and put his crash helmet on, he was fantastic. You know, he could do things with cars that not many people could do.
Actually, he spent so much time with the Italians, I often think that he became more Italian than a Finn. He spoke English like an Italian, he ate like an Italian, he was
arm gestures and behaviours like an Italian. So, yeah, the more I think about it, he's more aligned to there than he was to the Finns.
Michèle Mouton is the WRC's most successful female driver by a long way. She was brilliant at taming these Group B beasts. Her first WRC win was also the Audi Quattro's first, and she narrowly missed out on the title in 1982.
It was fantastic time, and we won Portugal, we won Greece, and we won Brazil too, and we thought we could do that, and it was just a problem of gearbox who avoided us to have this title. It was just a gearbox problem.
There was the incredible fight between Walter and Michèle Mouton, and that went down to the Ivory Coast. They were really battling hard. She was leading the event, and there was a crazy night service where the car didn't want to restart, so they changed some of the management and some electronics. She was running out of time, was getting in the usual panic. Then the car started, but she was still in the lead, but driving in the fog of others or in the dust of others in the night, and then she just stopped the event. Very sad was also that her father died just a few days before the event, so there was an enormous pressure on Michèle. So the whole thing just was an unlucky end, and even Walter would probably say today, maybe it would have been better if Michèle would have won that championship, because we never had that in motor racing.
Juha Kankkunen's career would see him take 4 championships, but his first was in 1986 with the Peugeot 205 T16.
In his time, Juha was a fabulous driver. He was very, very quick. He arrived on the scene straight out of Finland and set a lot of very quick stage times. It's clear he had a lot of potential, but he was also a very intelligent driver. He knew how to pace himself, pace the rally, and keep the car in one piece, and that's what brought him his success. He was quite flamboyant. He could attack at the right times. He knew when to put the pressure on, when to squeeze the other drivers, maybe draw them into a mistake simply by the sheer speed that he could apply.
He was never a driver trying to make a difficult line, to make incredible solution. He was always try to drive fast, smooth, and getting the line, and this allowed him to have the fastest time always.
With the explosion of power, technology and flamboyant driving style, there came an equally dramatic increase in popularity. Rallying had truly arrived on the world stage.
These pictures do exaggerate a little bit. Of course, the drivers knew where the junctions were. They knew whenever the junction is there are going to be a lot of people. So they knew that they can't drive through the ditches, they can't have the perfect line like they insist of having today, because they will be the people. So for 6, 5, 6, 7, 8, 10 corners, you had to take it a little bit easy, and all of them did that.
The volume of spectators would be so great, and all you would see was in front of you was a wall of spectators, and this wall used to open out. But of course, they would stand on the places on the road where you'd planned to actually drive, and you physically couldn't do that because you had a human standing there. So a lot of the times your pace notes didn't really mean anything. You were driving around walls of spectators.
You must in these days admit that rallying was threatening Formula One in popularity in motorsport. I mean, I would say that seeing these cars and experiencing them, that was a threat to Formula One in what is the most spectacular thing on earth.
And here to give you a driver's eye view of the speed of the Group B cars and the popularity of the sport in the 80s is Walter Roll in the car of the decade, the Audi Quattro.
Achtung, Nachkuppe links minus, 40, Nachkuppe mittelrechts plus innen, 80. Achtung, Nachkuppe rechts minus eng, sofort mittellinks plus 60, mittellinks Welle Aufkuppe, sofort mittelrechts plus lang, 70. Rechts minus innen Aufkuppe, sofort links voll, 50, mittelrechts plus innen, sofort links voll, sofort Kuppe voll, 70, Achtung Mittellinks plus 40, Mittelrechts plus innen, 50, Aufgabe rechts voll, 50, Mittelrechts plus innen, 50, Kuppe voll, sofort links minus, Achtung macht zu, links nach innen, sofort Mittelrechts plus plus, 80, Achtung Mittellinks plus innen, 50, Nachgabe Mittelrechts plus innen, sofort Mittellinks plus innen, 50, rechts.
It may have produced some of the greatest drivers and cars the sport has ever seen. The Group B period's fatal attraction to power at the expense of control was about to prove lethal. The era of the supercar was about to come to an abrupt and terrible end. We find out how and what happened next after the break. Welcome back to WRC history, the early years. By 1986, the Group B era had reached its zenith. These cars had zero-weight space frames and hot turbochargers next to fuel and oil. Add to that 500 brake horsepower's worth of performance and often difficult handling, it's fair to say that rallying had become very dangerous. A series of fatal accidents in 1985 and 86, involving both spectators and drivers, meant the age of the supercar had become untenable.
86 was a bad year because we had all these accidents and all that politics going on. What's going to happen, and a lot of misreaction by a lot of people. There was no safety in place, which was very naive by anybody involved. We were all falling out of a sky. Yeah, we were dreaming, we have the fantastic sport in the world, we have horsepower, we have spectators, we have everything. And then the whole building collapsed because the basics just got out of hand.
The accident in Portugal where 3 spectators were killed, and that was, that kind of carried on from the disasters we'd had in '85, and then Henry Toivonen in Corsica. And to me, it was a real tragedy. It was just terrible, and obviously Sergio Cresto, his co-driver, died as well. And I guess something had to change then.
But it was not the cars that actually were the problem. The problem were organizing the events. We were getting into millions of spectators. We were getting into queues of 10 kilometers on every accessible place where people were just parking up and wanting to see these cars because they were so incredibly spectacular. And there was no safety organized for any of this. Yeah, so the drivers were just driving over the feet of the spectators.
The cars probably, they did get too fast and they became too special. And sadly, we lost one of my teammates, Henry Toivonen and Sergio in Corsica, and there'd been other accidents as well, where their lives had been lost. So, I think it was a very difficult decision for somebody to make, to say that you were going to ban Group B rally cars at the end of the 1986 season.
Peugeot again won the Drivers' and Manufacturers' Championships in 1986, but the team and Juha Kankkunen's celebrations were muted. Following the tragic accidents, the response from FISA, the governing body, was swift and sweeping. Group B was promptly banned.
It was a very naive time, and we fall like a big stone. We just bang came back to reality. And then they banned Group B, which I think was the wrong move because we could have made Group B safer. The problem was not the cars, the problem was the safety of the events. And that, of course, then was taken to an issue and improved, and that's where we are today.
What came next was Group A.
I think it took Rally a long time to recover. I mean, for instance, I was at that point in time driving for Austin Rover, and really that sort of closed the door because they didn't have a car which fit the new sort of Group A regulations. So again, you were back, I think, to 2 manufacturers, which I think was Mazda and Lancia. They were the only people who really had a sort of a production type 4-wheel drive car. So I think rallying, it took rallying a while to come back from that.
The Group A car in 1987 was a showroom car with a roll cage stuck in it, sump guards, stiffer suspension, and the engine tuned as much as it was allowed within the regulations. Very much a standard car.
The Group A were cars very similar to the day-by-day car, to the car that somebody buy for our lady to go for shopping. So everybody said, oh, how we can have rally with this? How driver like Biasion or Cancun or Riol or any other one can drive this kind of car? They will refuse to do this. But then, at the end of the day, they jump into the Group A, and they had the possibility in this, with the Group A, to take the maximum of the car, you know, the maximum, and give sometimes over the limit without the problem that they meet with the Group B.
Got new manufacturing. You had start with a new technology on four-wheel drive systems. The car got more efficient. Everybody adapted very quickly on the Group A regulation, and like I said, you got many more manufacturers. Also, more people could win rallies. When cars came up with lower power, of course, more people could handle it straight away and could adapt to the driving technique what the car has been asking. So we had more and new drivers who could win the championship against people like Kankonen or Salonen or Mikkola, who was still driving. They got really forced to go much quicker than what they ever thought they have to do when they come from Group B to Group A.
Despite the skeptics who say it would be the death of rally, Group A in fact saw a healthy change in the sport. More manufacturers joined, notably the Japanese. More drivers could win rallies, and there were yet more events to participate in. So, from the birth of the motor car, through its first steps as a gentleman's hobby, to the teenage dramas of superstars and supercars, through 8 decades, rallying has grown and blossomed, and the technological explosion that brought us the WRC as we know it was still to come. When Carl Benz invented the automobile in the late 1800s, I bet he never thought that in 100 years, cars would be doing this. This is WRC history, the modern era. From the basic Group A cars of the late 80s to the high-tech WRC machines gracing the stages today, we chart the history of one of the most exciting motorsports on the globe. Coming up in this week's show, Lancia, the most successful team ever. We speak to their team manager and find out what really made them so unbeatable.
Our board management in Fiat say the important is to win.
Their biggest rivals at the time were Toyota. We have a look at the team that managed to break Lancia's stranglehold. Plus, we chronicle all the winners and losers from 2 decades of some of the best rallying action ever seen. Rallying had already emerged in the late 60s as a professional sport, with minis taking the helm. The Ford Escort, Renault Alpines and Lancia Stratos of the 70s brought rallying to people's attention. Spectators came out in their thousands to watch dramatic sideways action and the bravest of drivers in the world. And the 80s brought the extravagant, magnificent four-wheel drive monsters of Group B. The Peugeot 205 T16s, the Audi Quattros, the Lancia Delta S4, the most powerful machines to take to a stage, but also the most dangerous. It took the deaths in 1986 of Henry Toivonen and co-driver Sergio Cresto in Corsica before Group B was deemed too dangerous by far and was banned. It was time for rallying to regroup and reinvent itself. What the FIA came up with was Group A.
The Group A car in 1987 was a showroom car with a roll cage stuck in it, sump guards, stiffer suspension, and the engine tuned as much as it was allowed within the regulations. very much a standard car.
Would the absence of supercars ruin the sport, or would there still be public interest in machines that look like mum's shopping car in comparison? These were the questions on everybody's lips at the end of 1986.
Group A was a little bit of a letdown at first because the cars were slower, looked nothing like as exotic or dramatic. So it was fairly low-key at first.
On a spectator's point of view, everybody was very disappointed because everybody loved the cars, because you couldn't even imagine how fast they are, and you could hear the sound and everything. And then you got like a road car and you say, well, I could drive anything like that. Like a Group A car in '87 was like a road car. And yeah, it was very disappointing, but what I was surprised with how many spectators went out and see really that even smaller cars, less powerful cars, making a good show out.
The Group A were cars very similar to the day-by-day car, to the car that somebody buy for our lady to go for shopping. So everybody said, oh, how we can have rally with this? Our driver like Biasion or Cancun or Riol or any other one can drive this kind of car. They will refuse to do this. But then, at the end of the day, they jump into the Group A, and they had the possibility in this, with the Group A, to take the maximum of the car, you know, the maximum, and give sometimes over the limit without the problem that they meet with the Group B.
Before the 1987 season started, scepticism had prevailed, but as time passed, it became apparent that rallying was doing well. Audi hastily pressed an oversized 200 Quattro into service, Ford introduced the Sierras, and Mitsubishi had the Galant.
Got new manufacturing. You had start with a new technology on four-wheel drive systems. The car got more efficient. Everybody adapted very quickly on the Group A regulation, and like I said, you got many more manufacturers. Also, more people could win rallies.
Within a year, those cars were up over 400 horsepower. The following year, 1 year into the introduction of Group A, those cars were beating the times of the Group B cars at nearly half the horsepower. And what happened was there was a huge focus on developing tyres, developing suspension, making the chassis better.
And how did the drivers adapt? Some said that the heavier Group A machines would require a measured technique, the neatest lines, and inch-perfect use of the roads.
We were looking more at racing lines rather than really aggressive sideways style of driving that had existed before that. With a Group B car, if you made a mistake, you had so much power, you could recover speed quite quickly. With a Group A car, it took a while, and therefore the drivers who were smooth, straighter lines, were the ones that could get the speed from those cars.
You need to grow into the Group B with the power. So when young drivers got into the car, they find it really good fun to drive, but you need more experience to handle those cars. And when cars came up with lower power, of course, more people could handle it straight away and could adapt to the driving technique what the car has been asking. So we had more and new drivers who could win the championship against people like Kankonen or Salonen or Mikkola, who was still driving. They got really forced to go much quicker than what they ever thought they have to do when they come from Group B to Group A.
So rallying was far from over. After the break, the most dominant force to hit the World Championship, a team that took an awesome 6 consecutive manufacturers' titles, Lancia. And the Japanese effect, how the land of the rising sun turned European car manufacturers on their head. All that and more coming up in part 2. Welcome back to the History of the World Rally Championship. The first team to take full advantage of the new Group A rules were Lancia. Already renowned as a championship-winning team with the Stratos, they had also been a force throughout the Group B period. But it was their domination of the years 1987 to 1992 where they took the championship by storm.
It was created the world Lancia legend. Is a legend because a team that was able to win for 6 consecutive years the manufacturer title and in the same time three driver championship today is unique. There is not any other make that is arrived at this level.
They had a very strong team overall, strong management, good engineering, a succession of fantastic drivers, and a really good understanding of the sport of rallying and how to get the very best from their resources.
They had a brilliant team manager, Nini Russo, who, you know, had the measure of everyone. The guy was a genius. They had a great team of mechanics. They had a fabulous car.
I think that was the only manufacturer who really got into this Group A regulation straight away with a four-wheel drive car, and they had I think probably one of the best package together. It was quite a small, tiny car. They had a good engine on it, a good four-wheel drive system, and pick up good drivers. And they made their development quickly.
Lancia's successes were partly down to a win-at-all-costs mentality that sometimes stretched the rules.
They were tough. Every event they came with something new, and you know, the mark was raised every time, and they were a good, tricky bunch of competitors. You know, we're talking about a championship back in the early 90s that was nothing like as well regulated as it is now. There was a lot less regulation, a lot less application of regulation, a lot more liberty and freedom taken with interpretation. That's not to say anyone was cheating, it was just interpretation.
You always knew you were up against it with Lancia. If there were any tricks to be played, any special tweaks, you could be pretty sure that Lancia would pull them.
The reason of the success of Lancia was that we have interpreted the rule existing at that time. We have used all the possibility we have, like for example the use of the aircraft for the communication, the use of the helicopter for make service. We were always thinking something new, what we can do to improve, even if we were always at the top. Mr. de Coubertin said the important is to participate, but our board management in Fiat say the important is to win.
For me it was always fascinating because it was a real Italian team. And nowadays, if you look into teams, they are very international. In Lancia at the time, rarely anyone speak English. You know, the mechanic could not really communicate, so it was for them was a closed circle with all their information, all their development. If you couldn't speak Italian, you could not communicate. And I think that was a little bit the part of success on the beginning, that it was like a closed circle and everybody was working for the country.
It was a team that was a family, first of all, a mechanic, the engineering, the technicians, the driver, the management. Everybody at the same level, but everybody with his role, you know, the respect of each other, everybody on his role.
From the emergence of Group A to 1990, the sport was dominated by two men, Juha Kankkunen and Miki Biasion. When he won the championship for Lancia in 1987, Kankkunen became the first driver to retain his championship crown. His 86th title was with the Peugeot 205 T16. He also became the only driver to win championships in both Group B and Group A cars.
A truly fantastic driver, very adaptable. Very little seemed to faze him. Even if there was a problem with the car, he could drive around it. If things went wrong, he accepted it without too many dramatics. And I think that helped him get a lot of success that otherwise he might not have done.
But Juha was well known for being adaptable. His career 23 wins came with 6 different manufacturers. His third driver's title came in 1991 with Lancia, and he broke yet another record in 1993 when he became the first ever driver to win 4 championships.
Juha, at this point, it was probably like Sebastian Loeb nowadays. Juha, he has been 4 times world champion on different cars, and he could compete about anything, and he was quick.
His main rival at the time was Miki Biasion, an Italian with incredible consistency, finishing on the podium on over 50% of the rallies he entered. And in the 2 years he won the championship, he won 3/4 of the events he contested.
I would say Miki Biasion, Tiziano Siveri's co-driver. This was a fantastic crew. I believe that he was really always thinking and concentrated on winning. And beat the other, including the teammates, because at the end of the day, the most, let's say, fastest competitor were inside the team.
Mickey had a full background, full support, probably like Sébastien Loeb. French team, full support, grown up in the team. Same with Mickey Biasion, and I think that made him strong right during that two years when he won the championship.
Lancia may have dominated the first 3 years of Group A, but the next 3 weren't to be as easy. And that was mainly down to this man, Carlos Sainz. His car, the Toyota Celica, had previously been fast but fragile. In 1990, the car came of age. Sainz won his first ever WRC event in Greece, and then an incredible 8 consecutive podiums helped him to the title. But it was the victory in Finland that stood out. He became the first non-Scandinavian to win there.
I think it was a shock to begin with. It was always Scandinavian people or Finnish people winning the rally, and really nobody really had a chance. But then Carlos came and won it, and everybody were thinking that maybe we are losing the control and maybe Finnish drivers are not so fast anymore.
Toyota could have won the manufacturer's title if they hadn't been so focused on Sainz. Their sole other point scorer was Bjorn Voldegaard, taking his final Safari win of an impressive 4-decade career. However, Lancia and their trio of rally winners, Oriol, Kankkunen and Biasion, were always in the stronger position. Sainz and Toyota were the strongest combination at the beginning of '91. Sainz won 5 out of the first 8 events. However, the end of the season saw uncharacteristic mistakes by the Spaniard, including this huge roll in Australia.
When you're winning a championship, you can't think of just winning events. You've got to think of seconds and thirds. They're important. Non-finishes are tragedies. And that year, he wanted to win more. He wanted to win events more than he wanted to win the championship. Ultimately, that's what caused the problem.
Kankkunen and Lancia capitalised on Toyota's and Sainz's misfortunes and took their 5th manufacturer's championship and Kankkunen's 3rd driver's title. 92 and Didier Oriol must have felt cheated when after winning 6 of 14 rallies, he still only finished 3rd.
Didier was in the Lancia and looked odds-on favourite for the championship, took a lot of wins, and towards the back end of the season looked as though he was going to walk it. But inexplicably, everything went wrong that could go wrong on his last few events, and he ended up losing something that really he should have taken a good deal earlier.
In contrast, Kankkunen finished on the podium on every one of the 9 events he started. This was enough for Lancia to score their 6th consecutive manufacturer's title. It was to be their last. Carlos Sainz won the 1992 Drivers' Championship with 4 victories, including his first Safari. It heralded a new era. After many years of trying, the Japanese were putting their feet firmly under the table of the WRC, and the European manufacturers had better watch out. But for Lancia, all good things had to come to an end. After 6 consecutive manufacturers' titles and 3 drivers' crowns, Lancia pulled out of the sport.
At the end of the day, what happened that we win too much, and it was decided to stop because they realized that a victory of Lancia was not anymore a news. What was the news if Lancia has won this rally or the world champion was not a news, so they decided to go in '92.
And so the early 90s marked the beginning of a new chapter as Japanese manufacturer Toyota made their mark on the WRC.
TT, Toyota Team Europe, started off in the mid-70s as a private team, Anderson Motorsport, Uwe Anderson, former effective world champion, before the World Championship was inaugurated. He started the team.
Uwe Anderson had created it out of quite a small operation and moved into fantastic premises. It was great to have such a place to work, as I say, modern facilities, great workshops, everything you needed really to develop a rally car, build it and run it successfully.
Victory over driver and manufacturers champions Lancia didn't come overnight though. Toyota had some work to do on their Celica before it could compete.
It was clearly a very good car and initially not fully reliable, but gradually they got the car strong enough to survive and to be competitive on most surfaces.
The time when I got to Toyota in 1990, that was when the car really got competitive. I mean, it was just on the edge in 87, 89, 90, they really start to win rallies.
And so the success came for Anderson's unique team. It was in 1990 that Spanish Supremo Carlos Sainz won the first of their 3 drivers' titles in the Celica GT4.
They'd taken Carlos at a relatively early point in his career, and he and the team developed together. Carlos, as you know, is a very competitive person, gives a lot of attention to detail, and in a way he drove Toyota to push harder to get the reliability and the performance that he needed.
We find that very strong competitor. It was nice to fight with them. They won some driver title, some with Sainz.
Sainz took a second driver's crown for the Japanese marque in 1992, and a year later, Kankkunen and Oriol, having moved from Lancia, ensured there was a new name on the manufacturer's crown, taking it for Toyota, a feat they repeated in 1994.
Toyota, in fact, was a big competitor and possibly one of the best or the fastest we have in this 6-7 years of domination, you know, and so it's fair people, good relation, competitor, but with the respect of each other, but of course also with the willing to beat them.
We learned everything with Toyota, and in that moment Toyota had a big budget, everything was, in that respect, was quite easy. And then they immediately realized that Carlos was a leader, so whatever Carlos said, they would do. And the memories that I have from Toyota are fantastic. You know, that's probably the reason we went back in 98 and 99. But with Toyota we spent 6 years altogether, so it was a lot of time.
The early 90s saw Toyota scoop 4 drivers and 2 manufacturers' titles, and they weren't finished just yet. We'll catch up with the Japanese team later in the show. There is no doubting that a huge part of TTE's success was down to Carlos Sainz.
There are 2 different Carlos, the driver and the person. The most professional driver I've ever met. I said before, and I keep saying it now, you know, for me rallying is before and after Carlos. I think he made a big difference, the way he approached rallies, how professional he was, trying to be fit. Now we see drivers training, but that was not normal before. And Carlos and myself, we were the first ones that started doing sport regularly. And as a person, he's a very good family man, fantastic family man. He loves to be with his family, he loves to be with his wife, with his kids. He's a completely different person, much more relaxed than you would ever imagine.
The Spaniard's professionalism was universally admired. Nothing was beneath or beyond his attention.
As a driver and as a teammate, I have the most immense respect for him. His ability, his focus. He just wanted to win, and he wanted to be surrounded by people that wanted to win. And when he felt he wasn't getting that, he didn't throw a fit. He actually worked to get people on side, to get everyone to win. And he was a great guy, an absolutely brilliant team member.
Carlos, we are still good friends. We have been good friends. We could get on very well with each other because we had the same spirit about testing, developing the car. When it got to the rally, Carlos could be turned in a total egoist, but that was his nature. You know, it was my tire and this car and this, and I take it. Didn't ask him about friends, but I think that is the way how it is in the sport.
There is no doubting that Sainz was one of the best all-rounders the sport has ever seen. His commitment lasted from the first rally he did with TTE to his last with Citroën, an impressive career spanning 3 decades. 2 World Championships, 26 wins, and podium finishes on almost 50% of the events he started. The stats speak for themselves. One of his biggest rivals in the early 90s was Didier Oriol. Like Sainz, the Frenchman had a fearsome eye for detail, but it was this perfectionist nature that made him a reluctant performer in less than ideal conditions.
Didier is a driver who needs the car to be absolutely perfect to his requirements. Perhaps it took Toyota a little bit too long to get the car as he liked it. But of course, by the end of that first year, Didier had the car how he wanted it, and that helped him a lot in the following year.
He was just a fantastic asset at every stage of the game, but he had to be happy with the car. And that didn't mean the car had to be right, he just had to be happy with the car.
He was never conventional and had a reputation of being aggressive, but there was no doubt to his brilliance. Like most Frenchmen, he had a reputation as a tarmac expert, but his record proves he could win on all surfaces. Carlos and Didier made the podium more times than most, accumulating 59 podium finishes between 1990 and 1994. By winning the Network WRC rally at the end of '93, Juha Kankkunen became the world's most successful rally driver with 20 wins and a record 4th championship. '93 also saw Toyota take their first manufacturer's title. Lancia had withdrawn their manufacturer support, and due to sponsorship clashes, Carlos Sainz had joined the privately run Jolly Club Lancia team.
It was a disappointing year, yes. Lancia, they already knew, I think, they were going to retire the following year. We didn't. And we went, and there was not a lot of development. The team was very good. Claudio Bortoleto was very good to us, but things didn't go right, and we didn't win any event, and we were fighting very hard, and we were testing and working very hard, but things were not coming together.
In hindsight, 1993 was all about new cars. Monte Carlo saw Francois Delacour almost win on the debut of the Ford Escort Cosworth, Ford adding a further 5 wins throughout the year. Another car to debut in '93 was the Mitsubishi Lancer Evolution, although it only achieved 2 podium finishes. Colin McRae took Subaru's first ever win in New Zealand with the Legacy, which was fitting, as on the very next event, Finland, Subaru launched the Impreza, and with Ari Vatanen at the helm, they narrowly missed out on a win. In a Toyota, after years of disappointment, Didier Auriol finally took the championship in 1994. In contrast to his '92 season, he won only on the tarmac of Corsica and San Remo. Even taking the championship on the final event of the year wasn't as easy as it should have been.
We came to the RAC rally with Didier needing to get a certain number of points to win, and he had an absolutely dreadful rally. He went off the road, he knocked a wheel off, he rolled the car, then there was a technical problem with the turbo, and he ended up a long way back and wasn't looking too good for the title at that point, with Carlos up at the front. And I remember Uwe Anderson saying to me as we sat in the management car after all these disasters, does this guy really want to win the World Championship? But yes, he did. He got his act together in the second half of the rally, and Carlos made a mistake in Wales on the final leg. He went off. Didier came through to get the points that he needed.
After their impressive debut year, '94 wasn't to be so good for Ford. Just 2 wins, with Delacour taking a second Monte Carlo, and a fledgling Tommi Mäkinen taking his maiden Finland victory. Carlos Sainz had moved to Subaru and immediately proved that the Impreza was not just fast, but also a winning car, with victory in Greece. His 24-year-old teammate Colin McRae took another win in New Zealand and on his home event. Mitsubishi had not yet committed to the whole championship, and Armin Schwartz managed to get just a couple of podiums for the Japanese team. But that was all about to change. Still to come, the 2 Japanese giants go head-to-head. The Mäkinen years, from 1996 to 1999, there was only one man everyone wanted to beat. Find out if anyone could after the break. Welcome back to WRC History, the modern era. After Toyota's huge successes at the beginning of the Group A period, the mid-90s saw the beginning of a Japanese revolution. Right behind Toyota came Subaru and Mitsubishi.
I think it gave Mitsubishi in Japan a lot of encouragement. The support was tremendous, and you'd go to an event and there'd be a sea of Mitsubishi jackets or a sea of blue Subaru jackets supporting those cars.
In the red corner, Mitsubishi signed Tommi Mäkinen in '95, and the partnership was to prove to be one of the most successful the sport has ever seen.
It was very much a partnership. It's quite easy to say, yes, it was built around Tommy. That wasn't the case. We had something that he needed. He had something that we needed, and that is supreme driving talent. And putting the two together and making them work was a sign of a good team, and it did work very well and brought a lot of success.
It was very, very unique. I mean, also a big, great leader with Andrew Cohen. who has been there from the beginning and creating the whole team and everything around him. And Andrew was, of course, he was like a father to everybody. And I think that made the whole team, with a small group of people, very enthusiastic and very much into it, with a good working relationship to Japan.
Although they only managed to secure the manufacturer's title once in '98, Mäkinen took a record 4 consecutive World Drivers' titles. In the blue corner, Subaru had been involved in the WRC for a number of years, but it was only when they teamed up with ProDrive and produced the Impreza that they became a serious challenger.
It's been a long uphill battle. Greece for me always holds a very nostalgic and important part in my sort of involvement in rallying. Carlos winning there was a magic moment for us, and it was almost a turning point. I think from that moment on with the Impreza, we started putting in really solid performances. Colin was there, Carlos was there, everyone rallied round because we knew one of them was in with a shout.
1994 saw Sainz and McRae take 8 podiums between them, but 95 was to be their year. Team boss David Richards had the ultimate problem, trying to harness 2 drivers who could both win the title.
It was difficult to manage, I can tell you. It was challenging at times, but I always think that's what management's about. If it was sort of just about managing ordinary people, you get ordinary results. You manage great people, you get great results. I suspect the rivalry was really intense under the surface. You know, on the face of it, everyone's friends and everyone worked well, and that's the style of rallying. It's a bit like going for a round of golf with your pal. You know, it's very civilized, very gentlemanly, but you still want to win.
They were both very competitive, both very quick, both wanted to win, and it was not easy to. And Carlos and Colin, they always had a good relationship. You know, there's always some up and downs, but they've been friends always.
This was the first of 3 consecutive manufacturers' titles for Subaru, and to date, surprisingly, their last. While McRae and Subaru took the title in '95, it was a dreadful year for Toyota. An illegal turbo saw their results stripped and a year's ban in '96. As we've just seen, this era was dominated by 2 legends of motorsport, Tommi Mäkinen and Colin McRae. They were the biggest rivals, but the best of friends.
They were certainly similar in terms of speed, not necessarily in personality, but they were very, very keen rivals. And when you're looking down a set of stage times, you'd look for those to see who was setting the pace. Usually it would be one of those 2 at the top.
Between them, they have 49 victories and the following of thousands of rally fans from all over the globe. And it wasn't only on the stages that they shared a love for boys' toys.
Very similar in nature, both Colin and Tommy. They both like to live on the edge and ride motorbikes fast and do anything fast. And they're both true fighters in cars. Their commitment was incredible, and Tommy would recognise that immediately. There was other drivers in the championship who were probably more tactical, but he probably knew if he was going into a stage and he was having to fight for a win with Colin behind him, he knew he could have a big problem, because you can't play mind games with somebody like Colin. He would just give it his all on any stage.
Career-wise, Colin was mentored by David Richards, who spotted and then nurtured the young Scots' talents.
He came to us probably only 21 years old, I would think. And we treated him a bit like the apprentice to start with. He used to drive the van. We'd sort of send him out in a van and he'd drive the truck round, and sort of Marco Alen can remember him servicing his car on events, and he was very good technically. He could work his way around the car very well, and that stood him in good stead throughout his career. But he was also fairly volatile, and we would have sort of fairly harsh words because we were working on very small budgets, and when Colin threw a car into the trees and sort of destroyed a car, boy, it didn't just hurt me emotionally, it hurt our pocket.
It wasn't only Richard's pockets that hurt. When a rivalry is this intense, someone would always end up in a ditch.
Always something happened. Either I went off or Colin went off, and we never give up at all. We just pushed flat out.
Hindsight, though, is a great thing, and at the beginning of 1996, there was little hint of the extent of the dominance that Tommi Mäkinen and Mitsubishi would have that year. Colin McRae, who'd been favourite for the title, threw away certain victory in Indonesia and made some other silly mistakes, allowing Mäkinen to cash in. However, the manufacturer's title was once again Subaru's. With no Toyota due to their ban the previous year, Ford were the only remaining team. They had picked up Carlos Sainz, but apart from a sole victory, the team were far from gelling and producing championship-winning results. Mäkinen took the title and made it look almost easy.
It's never easy. I think what set up the season was some good solid results, but also some great wins as well, which meant that Tommy ran out champion relatively soon in the season. He probably wouldn't have a championship that easy the rest of his career.
1997 was a very close-fought competition. Mäkinen eventually took the title, but Colin McRae didn't make it easy for him. Tommy took a disappointing 8 points from the first 3 events before settling into his stride with wins in Portugal, Spain, Argentina and Finland. In the new WRC in Predsa, Colin McRae won more events than Mäkinen. However, a mid-season spate of retirements had made Colin's championship campaign near impossible.
Snap steering curl or something.
He would finish a single point behind the Finn. As in '96, strong finishes from Piero Liatti and Kenneth Eriksson helped Subaru to their 3rd consecutive manufacturer's title. Carlos Sainz in the new Escort WRC took wins in Greece and Indonesia and was a familiar fixture on the podium, but could only manage 3rd in the drivers' race. And at the end of the season, Toyota debuted their new WRC machine, the Corolla. '97 saw the beginning of the current regulations for rally cars, the WRC. Manufacturers no longer need to produce road-going 4-wheel drive turbocharged cars. The turbo and 4-wheel drive system can now be added to any model produced in sufficient quantities. This meant that more manufacturers could adapt existing cars to become world rally cars.
European manufacturers were not tending to produce special limited edition like 4-wheel drive vehicles. And I think the FIA really felt that they needed to do something to encourage the European manufacturers into the World Championship.
What we really wanted to do was have a new set of rules that allowed any car manufacturer to go to any competent rally team like ProDrive and manufacture a successful car for them. And that was the basis for those World Rally Car rules.
It enabled you to make a 2-wheel drive car into a 4-wheel drive car. So basically you were given specific dimensions where you could house your suspension, house your differential, which was very well regulated by the FIA, and I think, to be honest, it's still the same regulations that's in place today.
The rules were formulated to make it easier for manufacturers to make their cars suitable for World Championship rallying, but in doing that, it also made the cars more specialised and less production-based.
Even to this day, I still think they're the best thought out concept of rules that we've ever had in World Championship rallying. It does allow everyone to come along. It didn't require a great input from the car manufacturer, didn't require building ridiculous numbers of production cars that never got sold or were sold for silly prices. It was controllable. So it was a real milestone at that point in time.
The new WRC formula seemed to be a success, bringing new manufacturers in the shape of Seat to the sport. Only Mitsubishi continued with their Group A car. And in 1998, the championship seemed to come alive. The first 5 events of the season were all won by different drivers. Toyota were back in full force, Oriol and Sainz finally becoming teammates. At Mitsubishi, Richard Burns took 2 victories in his first full WRC year.
He was a good thinking driver, was Richard, and he could put together a rally in the way he wanted to do it. Certainly I remember his safari win with us was absolutely brilliant in terms of tactics, the way he drove the car, the way he controlled the pace.
Mitsubishi scored 7 wins out of 13 events and won the manufacturer's title ahead of Toyota. By mid-season, it looked like the title race would be between Sainz and Subaru's McRae, with reigning champion Mäkinen a distant 4th. But in the last 4 events of the season, Tommy scored 3 victories, and when Carlos Sainz retired, just 500 metres from the end of the final stage in Great Britain, Mäkinen retained his title for a 3rd consecutive time. It seemed that was only a warm-up for '99. First, there was the new Ford Focus WRC, driven by the now most expensive rally driver ever, Colin McRae. He won Portugal and Kenya with it.
to go to Safari, the world's toughest rally, and to go there on your third event with a brand new car and win was just, it didn't really sink in until people like Andrew Cow and Uwe Anderson were saying, you know, how have you managed to do it?
Then there was the new Peugeot 206 at the hands of relative unknown Marcus Gronholm. It was clear the car had speed, but it proved fragile in its first year. Skoda had also started their WRC assault with the Octavia, and Citroën randomly won 2 events in their Zara kit car. But it was the 3 Japanese greats who were battling it out at the top. In what was to be their last season in the sport, Toyota took the manufacturer's title with good podium positions from Sainz, and with Oriol battling tooth and nail with Tommi Mäkinen for the driver's title. Richard Burns had replaced McRae at Subaru, and between him and teammate Kankinen, they notched up 5 wins. The Englishman would finish second in the championship, only 4 points behind his old Mitsubishi teammate, but after a strong start to the season and consistent point scoring, Mäkinen became the first driver to win 4 titles in a row. Tommy's domination came to a sudden halt, and the brightest stars of the 2000 season were Peugeot and Subaru. For the first half of the season, Richard Burns was by far the favourite for the title. The new Impreza 2000 was quick, but the car wasn't quite robust enough, and on too many occasions Burns failed to score decent points. McRae and Sainz were paired at Ford, and more often than not, one would be on the podium. But it was never enough to take the fight to Peugeot and Subaru. Hyundai debuted the Accent without too much success, and Seat failed to shine in what would be their final year in the sport. It wasn't an easy ride for Peugeot, especially after a humiliating Monte Carlo when all 3 cars froze, literally. But in the second half of the season, Marcus Gronholm gained momentum and took his first title. Peugeot, helped along on 2 occasions by the tarmac king Gilles Panizzi, took their first manufacturer's crown. 2001 would be a clash of the titans. 5 drivers, Gronholm, Mäkinen, McRae, Sainz and Burns, from 4 different teams, were more than capable of taking the crown. Defending champion Gronholm struggled all year. His teammates Oriol Panizzi and Rovanperä all helped to give Peugeot their second manufacturer's crown. Citroën showed a glimpse of the future when Sébastien Loeb came second in San Remo in his first ever outing in a World Rally car.
I was surprised to finish so well because it was my first experience in the WRC. I remember that in the first stage I was maybe 4 seconds behind the best time, and that was a good surprise. I think the most important moment of my career.
Fittingly, it all came down to the last event of the year. 4 drivers could take the title. Mäkinen went out early. Colin did things the McRae way.
He had a very big accident, which put him out of the rally, which, you know, was a great disappointment for the whole team and for him as well. But you know, we'd obviously, those 3 years he'd been with us, we'd all put a tremendous amount of effort, and we could really see that championship trophy. But sadly, it wasn't to be.
Carlos Sainz had problems of his own and was withdrawn after a collision with spectators. That left Richard Burns to become the first ever English world champion.
You're the best in the world!
The new world champion moved to Peugeot in 2002, but from early on it became apparent that his teammate Gronholm had a point to prove. Marcus took 5 wins and 11 points finishes, handing him the championship 2 rallies early in New Zealand. Richard failed to win a single rally. Mäkinen moved to Subaru and also struggled. His younger, louder teammate notched up his first win in Great Britain and hinted of things to come.
Incredible. That was very, very, very special. Things like this, its memory will be very close to your heart all the time.
And Petter wasn't the only new face to take his first win. Sébastien Loeb winning the inaugural Rally Germany for Citroën, an event he would come to dominate. 2003, and both Sainz and McRae joined the young Loeb at Citroën. They started with a 1-2-3 in Monte Carlo and never looked back. Only 3 podiums through the 16 events were Citroën-free, and they took their first manufacturer's title. Ford had a young guns approach with Marco Martin and Francois Duval. The new 03 Ford Focus won almost straight out of the box, but early teething problems denied them any title chances. At Subaru, it was a sad farewell to one of rallying's legends as Tommi Mäkinen decided to hang up his driving boots. However, with 7 podium finishes, Petter Solberg took the title in true Petter Solberg style. Petter Solberg may have won the title in 2003, but there's no doubt that the biggest rivalry of the time was between Gronholm and Burns. Whilst many remember the media-generated clash between McRae and Burns, on the stages, more often than not, it was Gronholm who would be Richard's nemesis. The two had very different methods. Marcus was known for his foot flat to the floor, deal with the consequences later approach.
He just likes to fight for the win. He does not like to fight for the second or for a top 3 finishing, so he would just push the throttle and try to win.
Richard, meanwhile, was more of a solid point scorer.
He was a worker, was Richard. He was of the same mould as Carlos Sainz, if you could categorise. Richard was not the most natural of drivers, in my view, but he made up for it in bounds by his work level, his commitment and his professionalism.
The pair became teammates in 2002, and in the same car, statistics say that Burns could only beat Gronholm on tarmac. But it's interesting to note that Richard was, in his time, the only driver to really challenge Gronholm's superiority on the fastest event in the calendar, Finland. Sadly, it was a rivalry that wasn't allowed to continue after Richard was struck down with cancer that would tragically claim the Englishman's life. Coming up, we've had glimpses of his talent, but after the break, Sebastian Loeb takes us through his journey into the WRC's record books. Welcome back to WRC History, the modern era. After losing out on the 2003 championship by a single point, Sebastian Loeb was ready to take the rallying world by storm. His rise through the ranks had been impressive, and it was plain to see the young Frenchman's talents would soon be rewarded with silverware.
I expected to fight again for the championship. I took some confidence in 2003 when I saw that we are able to fight for victories and that I'm competitive nearly everywhere. So I said, okay, now it's maybe the time to try to fight for that.
The next 2 years saw Loeb and Citroën take both the drivers' and manufacturers' title with surprisingly little resistance. At Subaru, Petter Solberg couldn't retain his championship-winning form. Marco Martin in the new Ford Focus was fast, but failed to finish on too many occasions. Peugeot had introduced the 307, but were plagued with problems, both with the car and Marcus Gronholm.
Engine stall, engine has stall, and we cannot start.
Throughout 2004, Loeb claimed 6 wins as well as managing 6 second places, underlining his consistency on all surfaces.
When you are driving in World Championship, you hope that one day you will be world champion. And this day it was in Corsica, and I had a lot of friends there. It was also my family. We also won both titles together, my driver title and also the manufacturer. So everything was in France, so it was really a great moment.
The following year, Loeb was even more prolific, taking 10 wins over the season, smashing his record equaling 6 of the previous year.
It was a year where Marcus was purely tired this time, and we had an advantage on the tires, also against Petter, I think, but sometimes it was a big battle, but sometimes I was a bit alone.
2005 also saw Citroën take their 2nd consecutive manufacturer's title. As well as their driving talent, they looked to have the most reliable car in the championship in the Zara. Gronholm left Peugeot for Ford in 2006, and the Finn's resurgence was immediate. He won the first 2 events.
Happy birthday to you. Happy birthday.
Seb, however, was on for another record-breaking year. In Japan, he took his 27th win to make him the most successful driver ever. He was cruising to the title, but a mountain bike accident ended his season prematurely and left Gronholm a chance to steal the championship.
What was difficult to live was that it was not in my hands. I couldn't do anything. I could just stay at home and listen to the results and see that Marcus is flying over all the others and winning, and so that was difficult for me. But finally, Marcus made a mistake in Australia, and then I was champion at home, so that was a new experience.
The 2006 champions fight with Gronholm continued into 2007. This time Gronholm led for most of the year. The season saw some great battles, including the closest ever rally in New Zealand, where Gronholm's winning margin was a mere 0.3 of a second, the equivalent of 7.6 metres after 350 kilometres.
We had some great battle in a lot of rallies. It was the pressure all the time, all the season, and even in the last race, so that was really very exciting.
On speed alone, they were inseparable, and in the end, it simply came down to who made the most mistakes. 2 consecutive offs for Gronholm in Japan and Ireland handed Loeb the lead and left him only needing a top 4 finish in Wales, which he duly achieved. Loeb had now equalled Mäkkinen's record of 4 consecutive drivers' titles, as well as continuing to be the most successful driver in the history of the sport. A staggering 36 wins at the end of 2007. While Loeb may have swept up the drivers' titles, Gronholm's efforts in 06 and 07 were not wasted, helping forward to their first manufacturers' titles in 27 years.
That's the one thing that I'm not happy about, the fact that it's taken me so long to win the championship for Ford. Looking back now on reflection, we probably weren't ready to win in those early years, and I think, you know, this business is no different to any other business. You don't build a successful business overnight. The nice thing now is I really feel that, you know, that we can sustain that position. I don't see any reason why we can't remain at the top and keep winning events for Ford.
But what of the future for the WRC?
The first issue we're trying to address is to control the costs. The second issue we're trying to address is to allow new manufacturers to come in and be competitive.
What I would like to see now, I would like to see the cars, you know, slightly more. I think the advantage of rallying against any other kind of motorsport is that it used to be very spectacular. We don't overtake, because we don't compete like in circuit, we compete against the watch, not against each other. So I think I would like to see it more spectacular.
We have to broaden the appeal to the spectators and the enthusiasts, of course, but also to the other manufacturers. There are some on the fringes that would perhaps like to be involved, but cost is also always a prohibitive issue.
I hope you see a period of stability, and I hope you see a period of planning. We've achieved our first step this year with the single tyre. That's certainly a big cost reduction. Now we're moving to the cars. We're saying the cars have got to come off the mass-produced car. They can only do limited things to it, which what we're calling as a kit. The kit will be controlled as to what it is, and the biggest control is going to be time. They have a limited time in which they can fit the kit, so that in itself is going to control what they can do to the car. That will keep the cost down, and I hope that will enable some of the manufacturers that are presently on the sidelines to look at what we're doing and come back and say, hey, this is a good marketing tool, we can afford to be in there. The cars will be representative of what is sold in the showroom. They'll have this little extra kit clipped to them to make them look good, sound good, and hopefully it'll be great rally.
The past 20 years have seen some of the most legendary drivers, the most important evolutions in rallying machinery, and some of the best teamwork. And there's plenty more to come from the most dramatic motorsport in the world.